Jamie, what's up, man? Welcome to the Happy Engineer podcast. Glad you're here.
I'm glad to be here myself. Happy to see you again.
Yeah. And again, we were reminiscing before we hit record back in, I couldn't decide if it's 2011 or 2012 when we met, but I think actually that serendipitous encounter would be a really fun place to begin. And I didn't warn you we were going to go here, Jamie, but I want to tell you a story and you'll know where this is going way before any of my listeners would. But when I was a kid, one of my absolute favorite things to play with was Connects.
Mm.
I had a huge bin of Connects, and my favorite thing ever, the Big Ball Factory. It was like this monstrous thing. You had a motor on it, drop the balls and go through this roller coaster and all that stuff. I never expected when I became a mechanical engineer and started working full time at Whirlpool Corporation that I would walk into a week-long training event and there in the front of the room would be a giant sorted bin of Connects toys, which for those who don't know, Connects these colored plastic toys kind of in the family of Legos. And I was like in heaven. It was the best week of training of my life. But would you explain what the heck was going on with those Connects? And I'm actually really curious, where did you get the idea for what ultimately became, I would say, one of the most impactful trainings I ever did in my career? But how did you come up with that and why Connects?
Well, I had been using as a change management tool training for quite a while, and I always liked training to be experiential. Back way back in my Chrysler days, we had built simulations using Legos to build Jeeps, and we taught very specific lessons like pull, like in control, capable and robust processes, and things like that. And most of those simulations are sort of before and after, sort of experience one way, experience the other. And so when we went to put together a week-long training, I wanted something that was more like real life, a little closer to real life, with lots of nuance and complexity and stuff that, quite frankly, doesn't go together as straightforward as Lego does. And so I wanted to create a simulation where there was no right answer. There was no predetermined answer. It was really just a chance to practice the capabilities and mindset of continuous improvement. And so we came up with this. We used Connects because it was so dynamic. There were so many different things you could do with it from a construction standpoint. And so we designed this aircraft with variations around it and then added all sorts of other, chaotic stuff to it so that throughout a week, people could go back to it and back to it and back to it and sort of practice real continuous improvement. And so teams would get to work together, they design solutions, and everybody got better, but they all got better differently, which I think is important because they all follow the same principles, but there wasn't like one right answer to making those improvements. And I've been out of, I'll say, the training game for quite a while. Making learning experiential was always core, and it just happened to relate to those Connects and that simulation.
Yeah, super fun. And so contextually, this is when you were still one of the co-founders and running the Lean Learning Center out of the east side of Michigan here, not far from where I'm at. Are you, by the way, still in Michigan? Where are you these days?
No, I live in Pennsylvania. I actually moved to Pennsylvania 2008, 2009, forget actually now which year, but I still had the training center there in Michigan. And Andy Carlino didn't live there either. We would just travel in for training because most of the time we were on the road at clients
all over the place. Yeah,
and it really didn't matter. We sold that organization back in 2015, but we were actually trying to decide where to put it. It's easy to get to Detroit. Rent is cheaper. I lived there at the time when we founded the company, and it seemed like a good place to put up a training center.
Yeah, well, and plenty of automotive engineers need these principles and that type of training. It makes a lot of sense. So this exercise, I love the simulation experiential learning concept, and maybe we'll connect back to that later in our chat here. But for me, it was super engaging. I mean it when I say the most impactful training I did in my entire engineering career, outside of maybe the Whirlpool OpEx Six Sigma training. And the only reason I put that in comparison is more the magnitude of that was significant.
Sure.
But in terms of a single week experience, the best. And so many of these lean principles, the continuous improvement mindsets, and then how to put it into practice, they're easy to read. And until you actually experience it, you don't really get it,
Hmm.
was what I found. I'd read the
Yeah.
books, I'd done the training in college and in my master's degree, et cetera, as far as the IQ side of this. But until you actually experience it, it's not the same. And so I'm curious for you, can you back us up, Jamie? You mentioned you're at Chrysler, and like when did lean as a area, continuous improvement really enter your world as a focus? But also, how did you come to that discovery or the passion around creating these simulations and mastery in that type of learning?
So my lean backgrounds is probably a bunch of stories I could tell, but I'll start from an engineering standpoint. I'll start when I was um, really just doing sort of intern type work, and so I had an internship. I was doing side work for my father, who ran a machine tool company. They designed and built and sold machine tools. I was designing software. I was writing software to go along with the machine. And the software, which took some of the stuff I wrote, took like all day to compile, right? But this one particular program,
What year
uh,
would it be right now, Jamie? Can you put us in context?
early 90s,
Early 90s. Okay.
early 90s. So very early 90s. But I was working on stuff that would, for a prototype part, the prototype drawings would go to another engineer, which the drawings would sit on their desk, they'd write code, and then it would go out to the machine tool to run the part. And so I wrote code to automate that. And
Okay.
and so two things happened when I did that. First, I was coming up with the wrong answers. So I thought, right? That's what they told us. I was coming up with the wrong answers. But in fact, I went back to the right datums and built up the right program in the way it was actually supposed to be done. They had the wrong answers. And apparently they had had them
Mm.
for quite a long time. That taught me to be curious. Don't just kind of go, "Oh, we know how to do this," as fact. And then the second part of this is we took what essentially took 6 weeks to happen because it sat on mostly time sitting on an engineer's desk, waiting in queue. We took it from 6 weeks down to 6 minutes. And that just sort of taught me how much time can be saved in organizations. And so I didn't know lean from nothing at that point, but I got curious about how to make organizations better. And so I had that fortuitous opportunity early on. I learned a lot about lean in my first role at Harley Davidson, which I wrote about in a chapter in Mark Rabin's Practicing Lean book, kind of my first bout with lean. And then when I got to Chrysler, I was in product development. We were doing a lot of cool stuff in product development, but really beginning this sort of massive lean transformation hadn't even kicked off yet at Chrysler
Okay.
and manufacturing and supply chain. And so my mentor introduced me to the right folks, and I jumped right into design content and design simulations. And we had a big consulting firm helping with that. So I wasn't sitting down with a blank sheet of paper, but
Okay. Yeah.
I got to contribute a boatload of stuff to the content, to design. Like I said earlier, we're doing stuff with Legos, so running around to like Kmart's to pick up the Legos that we needed because they wouldn't sell to us directly, and all these quite challenges. And so I'll say that was when I started getting curious about how people learn as well as what they learn, because we were challenging fundamental assumptions in how the company was run at
Mm,
that point.
I
Fortunately,
love that.
was blessed with a lot of curiosity that set me on both paths.
Mm. It's funny you mentioned driving around to Kmart's. One of my fondest Whirlpool memories was being in Cleveland, Tennessee, where we have a factory build cooking products. And we were doing a prototype build, and there was a screw that we had left the box in Michigan. And it was just a off the shelf type of screw. And I literally spent the whole afternoon and evening driving to every hardware store within 50 miles of the factory, buying every single screw they had for that build. Oh, not my shining star moment in my career. So tell us then, and I want to move into how this evolved to your current or most recent book. But if you were going to summarize of all the years doing lean training and going into organizations from the Fortune 200 all the way down to smaller organizations and everything in between, what would you say are the biggest aha type of takeaways, those light bulb transformational moments that you would see individual leaders or organizations then wrap their head around and actually then turn into meaningful results? Is there one or two things that you would say, this is the thing I'm always waiting for them to sink their teeth into, and as soon as that happens, you know it's going to go somewhere good? What's that reflection on your years in training? What would you say?
Yeah, I'd say one is just the idea that a good lean organization is also a learning organization. The idea that we don't know the answer, because you kind of go, if I knew the answer, it's just an execution problem. Just do what you're supposed to do. If that doesn't work, if what we know what to do doesn't work, then it's a learning problem. We have learning to do, even if it's relearning what we already knew, or it's learning what somebody else figured out, or it's learning something brand new. Doesn't matter. It's learning, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, we should just execute what we already know. So I think that fundamental just shift in mindset is super important. And it sort of relates to the fact that it's all problem solving, right? Whatever you want to call it. The other lesson, which fortunately I believe I learned early on and hold even more dear today, is that there is no one right way. That you have to make it your journey, your transformation, get from your version of your current state to your version of what good looks like. And so nobody cares if you do lean or don't do lean. They care if you deliver value and
Yeah.
do so consistently and effectively and at cost and all those sorts of things. So how do you get there? It's just a pathway to get there. And there's no one right way. There's a lot of people that will sell you the right way. There's probably some wrong ways. There's probably some faster ways, but there's no right way. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's gives people license to maybe just get started and move forward, figure it out from there.
Jamie, this is something I experience as a coach where I'll give you one example. We have a concept or a principle in our coaching program, the Lifestyle Engineering Blueprint, that we call the playbook. And the playbook is this idea of pulling all the strategies and actions and tools together into a rhythm of, in engineering terms, we might have PDCA or Lambda or, a cycle. Say, what's your daily rhythm? What's your weekly rhythm? What's your quarterly rhythm? What questions are you asking yourself? What actions and plans are you making? Are you executing, following through? Just a really basic concept to say there's no point learning new things and all of the mindsets and strategies we do in coaching if we don't execute on a regular basis. Well, a lot of times an engineering leader going through the program will say, give me the exact recipe of how to do the playbook. Do I ask this question? Should I do it in the morning? Do I need to do it here? Should I use an app? Is it a journal? And I don't want to give them that answer. You need to own it or you'll never do it. If I tell you exactly the way, 2 weeks after you finish this program, you're going to stop doing that. And so let's talk about what's going to work for you, your version of good. How can we integrate that in? And some people really get it and they sink their teeth into that. Other people really resist that. So no, just give it to me exactly. Tell me exactly what to do. So what's your experience as a trainer, as a coach, as an instructor, when somebody honestly just sits back and says like, please just give me the answer. Tell me the recipe. How do you help somebody to get off of that posture and say, no, you need to own the recipe. You need to step in and take this or it's not going to last. How would you help somebody do that?
I'll say for starters, and this will be my cop-out answer, is I don't. I'm at the fortunate place where most of the work I do is one-on-one work, deep, long relationships, and I kind of only work with people that do want to roll up their sleeves and
Got it. Yeah. Choose
own
great
it.
clients. That's a great answer.
So that's my cop-out answer is I pick people that won't give me that answer or won't ask that question. But I still get it. It's at different times. And even my last book, I mean, a lot of times in the past, I'd be like, well, you can do it any way you want, but here's one way you could do it. And the more often that was the way people do it, is the one way I showed them. And so, especially when I'm in sort of coach mode, if I were for doing that, I'd always try to give people more than one answer, right? Well, here's an option. Here's another option. Here's another option. Or I give them an extreme option, which they probably can't actually pull off. And they have to sort of subtract to get to an answer rather than start with zero, start with infinity and then trim and back off until they get an answer. But I do it in a way that tries to unlock them from their stuckedness and get them moving, but still really require that they own the answer at the end.
Stuckedness is a technical term from
Yeah,
cognitive behavioral therapy, right? So everybody
right.
knows. It's a oh man, I love that. I think that's really wise, and in some ways, that's a similar thing to what I do. Say, well, look, here's kind of the ultimate package. That's you could do all of this. This would be the most I could imagine anybody ever needing. But the reality is, you probably only need some subset of that. Go choose, go start, go implement, and then iterate and learn as we go. One other thing before I move on that stuck out to me, I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned how a lean organization is a learning organization, but then there's also the problem of, well, if we know what to do and we're not doing it, it's just an execution problem.
Mm-hmm.
How often would you say is the problem actually an execution problem where, look, you actually already have a great answer here. This will work. This will get you results, but you're simply not doing what you already said you need to do, versus a learning problem. We are far from an answer that's going to get us the result we want, and we need to focus there. What's your perspective on, like, is there one or the other that stands out as the main culprit, or totally situational? And then how would you decide, do I have an execution problem or a learning problem?
Well, so yes, as far as which one's the main culprit, I'll sort of frame it this way. I'm going to make up some numbers just to
Perfect.
make the point. If you look at the number of problems you have, it's probably 70% execution and 30% learning.
Okay.
If I have 101 problems. Okay, 70% of those are, I know what to do. I just need to do it, right?
Okay.
And when it comes to impact, right? Because you kind of go, well, not all those problems have the same impact. Some of them are pretty trivial. When it comes to impact, I'd say it's probably 70% a learning problem,
The other way.
meaning the stuff that's impacting you more is the stuff that you really don't know how to get. Again, somebody might know, but you don't know what you need to know. How do I sort that out? For starters, one of my favorite questions in problem solving, it's really two questions, but it is, I put it in terms of asking this when we get to some analysis, but really you can ask this at any point in a conversation about a problem, is what do we not know about this problem? What's the best way to go learn what we need to? And quite frankly, if those are questions that are geared towards assuming that we have some learning to do, and then we have a knowledge gap we have to close.
Yeah.
But quite frankly, if the answer is, well, we know what we need to know, right? Then that becomes immediately clear. It's like, what do we not know? Well, we know what we need to know. We know what we need to know, so let's go do what we need
Go do it.
to do. I think that question can often make that situation more visible about whether
Yeah.
we have a fork in the road or not.
Yeah. Would you repeat those two questions really quick?
Yeah. So it's, what do we not know about this problem? And what's the best method, which could be tool, approach, whatever. What's the best method
Sure.
to go learn what we need to learn?
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So putting those questions in at the right moment to help quickly dissect or separate, is this purely an execution thing, or it's evident there's a big knowledge gap here to go start doing the work.
Absolutely.
I love that. So Jamie, your newest book, which you've got multiple books, I encourage everybody to go read. I loved The Hitchhiker's Guide to Lean. That book is super fun. Definitely want to encourage people to get a copy of that as well. But your newest book, People Solve Problems, and the subtitle, The Power of Every Person, Every Day, Every Problem. I love that. Just this all-encompassing every problem. It's kind of in one of those titles that got me thinking. At first, it's like, okay, this is really interesting. And then I went through the mode of like, well, isn't this kind of like, obvious? But then, we're in this AI revolution right now, and everybody's like, oh, what's going to happen with computers solving the problems for us? And I got into like, maybe it's a really much deeper thing than I thought. And got excited as I went through some of the content. And there's so much we can unpack here. But I wanted you to first just tell us a little bit about this idea that we all know it's important to improve the people in our organization's ability to solve problems. Like, nobody's going to argue that that's an important thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But our default reaction of how to go do that, tools, templates, training, all the things, that's not where the leverage is at. And when I saw that in, just your description of the book, I was just like, oh, okay, I've got some things to learn here. So tell us about how you stumbled into this gap between our default setting of how to help people solve problems versus where the leverage really is, and maybe make an argument for why this is not going anywhere. It's still important no matter what happens with computers or technology or anything else.
For starters, I watch organizations recognize problem solving is important and try to go solve that problem over and over and over and over again. And everyone throws the same solutions at it. They throw templates and training at it. And I'm not against either one of those things. They're not inherently bad, but they're far from the solution. I notice organizations fail at that and then essentially fail to do the hard stuff that they need to do to actually make that effectively better. So you see organizations try to retrain and then jump to a different template and then retrain. And at what point are you really getting better? The other realization is that we lack curiosity about our problem solving as human beings, right? It's kind of like we lack curiosity about how we breathe, because we haven't been problem solving as long as we've been breathing, but almost, right? So when you work with a high performance athlete and you actually learn, oh wait, there is actually more to learn about how you breathe, you're surprised. But if you're working with a high performance athlete, there's actually a lot more to learn about how to breathe effectively. The fact is we're not curious about how we breathe. We're not curious about how we solve problems because we've been doing it for so long. We grew up solving problems. And then depending on our training or educational background, I have 3 engineering degrees. You just kind of assume, well, they taught us how to solve problems, so I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And then you just cease to be curious about it, which means you stagnate. Most of us stagnate for quite a long period of time. And that's a problem when it's such a powerful force for making improvement.
Okay, I'm deeply convicted by this because the breathing example strikes me right to the heart, because as a coach now, I've been participating in a lot more personal development than ever before in my life. You started back in 2017, 18, and still I invest a huge amount of energy and time and money into my own growth, and stumbled into this idea of breath work as a whole area of the coaching world. It's not every coach's thing, but it's like I had never done breath work before. It's like, what are they even talking about? I did this hour-long Wim Hof breath work thing with guided practice and had this tremendous experience, and it opened this floodgate of curiosity, to your point. Like, what happened to my body? What was going on in my mind? Why does this work? What's the deal with the alkalinity of blood? Like a whole like probably at least 1/4 of my life was dedicated to nothing more than Googling breath work and all these techniques. There's hundreds of different techniques. This is crazy. So now I'm asking myself the question, well, how much, or when was the last time I actually had this natural curiosity like you're talking about for my own problem solving ability? I think the truth is, Jamie, I haven't really explored that at all since the early days of learning how to be an engineer, to your point. It's just something I take for granted. So anyway, just saying that, like, I think you're absolutely right. So what do I do, Jamie? I'm stuck, man. I haven't even thought about my problem solving ability for a decade plus. Where does somebody go to start learning how to breathe?
There's a few different options. One is get a coach, to your point around getting a breathing coach or going through an experience to learn more, is get somebody to help you be more curious. Also, just like any self-improvement, the basic idea of reflection and experimentation on your own work can make a big difference. I actually recently, there was a decision. It wasn't that important a decision, but it was also one I was strangely stuck on. I used 3 different techniques just out of experimentation, just see how those different techniques would help with this particular decision, and just experiment, right? And so I think reflection and experimentation can make us curious again, make us experiment and iterate. And I'd also say, you got to, as part of that, you got to be outside your comfort zone. That's where the experimentation gets really healthy. And then the third thing is that I think really helps is I'll call it deliberate practice, which you could say is the same thing as experimentation and reflection. But what I'm really headed at is work on hard problems collaboratively with others. Learn their problem solving techniques. Learn how they see problems. And a complex, difficult problem, you all approach it differently. You get to learn not just about a hard problem, but you get to learn how they think about it differently. And it's one of the reasons I enjoy working on boards of directors, because when I'm a coach, it's kind of like, well, two of us are working on the problem together. But when you're on a board, several of you kind of, coming at
Yeah.
this problem, and some just throw sort of analogy matching at it. Some are just throwing experiences at it. Some are going into research, and you just get to see everyone thinks about a problem differently, and pulling that all together. Again, if you're practicing deliberately, can help you be more aware of your own efforts to
That's really good.
problem solving.
So this tendency towards, hey, let's just update the template or throw a tool at this, get a new app, get a new piece of software that supposedly solves this thing or whatever. One driver is a lack of just genuine intellectual curiosity around our problem solving as individuals. I'm curious, as you were writing the book, are there any other root causes of why we default so heavily to that? And I'll share with you my hypothesis. Tell me if you think I'm right or wrong, and maybe what you found out is actually true. But it seems like my memory of being at Whirlpool, and this is no discredit to the organization, but just companies in general, there was a more direct reward to, like, hey, I created this tangible template thing that everybody can use. It's easy to distribute among the team, and I can stamp my name on it that I created the template, and I might get credit on my performance review for being the guy who made the template for X problem. And something that's more of a cultural shift or a mindset shift or a leadership transformation is a lot harder to put your stamp on, so to speak. And it's also a longer game than just throwing together a template. So it felt like just that's the natural way to get the win. And maybe that's part of why we go that direction. But is that true? And then what else would you say? Like, why are we so tool hungry or template hungry in our companies?
Yeah, so I think it is true. And I think it's, you kind of described that from the creator side or the decider side, who's trying to make a change. But it's also true of the user side, right? Hey, my
Mm,
organization wants me to perform better. How are they looking for me to signal that I'm invested in doing better? Well, they want you to use this template. Great, I'll use the template. It's the easiest, fastest way to signal that you're a good team player, you're a good sport, you're doing what you're asked to do. And
good point.
and so you just assume that that's the expectation. The other side is, capabilities. They're harder to measure. Behaviors, they're harder to observe. And so the real stuff, it's harder from an individual standpoint. If I want to get credit for doing well, it's easy to show somebody my template. It's hard to show somebody my behaviors. So both sides of that relationship, the sort of deciders trying to make an impact and the users trying to demonstrate they're on board moving
Sure.
forward,
Yeah.
it's just an easier path. And it's not a bad path. I want to be clear about that. There's nothing wrong with having a template to
Right.
say, this is the best manifestation of what good practice looks like. Now, are you going to practice with that well, or are you not? There's all sorts of things that people are responsible for. One of my kids has his driver's permit, and you're supposed to drive for 60 hours of practice before you take your driver's exam. Well, that's a self-reported measure. Did you do it? Did you do it as intended or not? And you just drive around the block a few times.
Mm-hmm.
It's all whether you put your energy into it, which is why I think direct leadership at every level becomes such an important ingredient to make this happen. So I think those are ingredients as far as causes.
Yeah.
I also think just the real work, the culture change, is hard, right?
Yeah.
It
Yes,
is
it is.
hard, and most people don't have, not to take it back to a template, they don't have the tools to do culture change. It's one of the reasons a lot of my collaborative advising and thought partner work with leaders is on culture change, because they know it's important. They just never sat down to think about how are they going to shape their culture. I mean,
Yeah.
they learned how to budget, they learned how to do performance reviews, they learned how to engineer, but they nobody ever taught them how to change the culture. So
Yeah.
they shy away from it.
One of my past guests on this podcast, Jamie, made a statement that in life we get to choose our hard. You know, you can either do the hard work of culture change here, or you're going to deal with the hard consequences of never getting to the improvement and the learning and the place. You're just constantly fighting deadlines or fighting the friction of a process and a culture that doesn't work. So
Yep.
choose your hard. So in the book, you talk through these four big areas where there is actually leverage to improve in our own problem solving as people and in leading people in solving problems. I just want to unpack maybe the one that you think is the easiest for us to sink our teeth into or get our head wrapped around today. If you were going to say, look, this is the one I'd really love everybody to understand and take away as a key principle of why people solve problems, every person, every day, every problem. Which one do you think is the one that people connect to and resonate with first, or the easiest of the four?
I think it's the capabilities. And so to compare it to the other four quickly, I mean, behaviors, harder. That takes more both self-work and leadership work. Coaching, hard to learn to be a coach. And you have to kind of like, well, is everybody on board with me being a coach or coaching? Changing the role of a leader is a lot in that, right? It's like, what is my job as a leader? It's a big unpack. So I think capabilities is the most direct, that they're doing problem solving anyway. So it's just a matter of how well they do it. Again, you can take your template. You don't have to throw away your template. Take it. Take whatever template you were given. I don't want to say it doesn't even have to be a good one. Probably shouldn't be a pattern, but doesn't have to be the best one. Take whatever template you're using and just be more curious about the capabilities around how you do each step. Or just start with one, right? Just start with how you test to learn. Start with how you ideate different solutions, right? Instead of the 3 you come up with 20 and just practice that, right? So back when I was doing more, I'll say, entrepreneurial work, I would practice being an entrepreneur. I would come up with a new business idea every single month, flush it out. Some I'd test a little bit, some I'd just be, that's dumb, and throw it away. But I'd practice, right? Because coming up with ideas to build a new business is not easy. So why not practice that skill? So I think it's the easiest because people are already doing the work. They already have a platform to do the work in any case, whether they have a template or not. So just start being more curious about what capability you bring to that problem solving work.
Super 1000% agree, exclamation point on this idea of practicing. And I love the entrepreneur example, because most people would say, what do you mean practice being an entrepreneur? Like, you either are one or you aren't one.
Right.
You're either doing entrepreneurship or you're not. But to say, well, no, what do entrepreneurs do? They create ideas that create value, and they create systems to capture that value. And that's something that exists in thought before it exists in the real world. So let's go practice that discipline. I think as a coach, my equivalent of this is when I do coaching drills or practice for myself. It's like, I think about a situation a client might be in. I imagine them sharing with me like where they're stuck, and then just go to the whiteboard and list every powerful question I could think of to ask in that moment to help them unlock or get, what was the stuckedness, get out of their stuckedness that we found from earlier. And yeah, we do take for granted that I've done it once, so I can do it 1,000 times. But what is really the capability of yourself and then your organization to just execute what we have and ideate what we have? So capabilities. And the other 3 that are harder, Jamie, do you think that's because individually it is in fact harder for me to develop that mindset or skill or whatever it is? Or is it more because of the organizational inertia and sort of the challenges that come in the context of community or the whole team that make them harder?
Yeah, I'd say both. But I think as you go through those topics, they become more of an organizational barrier than just an individual barrier. So you can change your own behavior, but if you change it so much out of alignment with the rest of the organization, you're going to have a hard time. You have to be really confident to stand out that much. you can start to develop as a coach. But if the organization doesn't value that, then you might be wasting some time, not real wasting, but not get sort of credit for the time you're
Yeah,
investing
yeah.
in being a coach. And then the role of leader, it comes down to what do you spend time on and how you build your systems. And so there's certainly a lot you can do as an individual leader, but there's also things you can't do as an individual leader. There are individual barriers to each of these, but as you go through those sort of sections, I think it's an increasingly has to be more and more of an organizational solution
Yeah.
rather than just an individual.
And so I get this question a lot from young engineers where it's like, Zach, I really want to be a part of changing the culture in whatever way. In this case, helping everybody solve problems better. But in my role at my level, I don't have that influence or that impact to shape these things. I'm not the VP of engineering. I'm not the CTO. I'm fill in the blank. What would you say to someone who is at a lower level in the org chart, so to speak, who might pick up your book and read it and be really excited about these ideas, but is in a way less able to influence the big decisions in the direction that that organization's going?
I'll say maybe three things. One is you can always make yourself better. So make yourself better, right?
Yeah.
Somebody pays you to do your work, do it better. That's one. Two, build up because you're doing things better, use that as a pathway towards promotion where you get more influence and more control. So do things better, do things more visibly, get the next promotion, have a greater impact, play the long game. And then the third thing I'll say is I always like to say that I don't believe in organizational change. I believe individuals change, and it's a one heart, one mind at a time game. So pick one person to influence and help them change. And then maybe whether it's the two of you separately or together, you change 3 more minds. Those 5 change 10 more. And so just start with one person. Just start trying to impact one person. Could be your boss, could be a peer, could be your mentor that's 3 levels up and not your anywhere. Just try and have an impact. Even CEOs, they sit there and they're supposed to be in control of the organization, but they're not. They're like, I can't tell 8,000 people, 10,000 people,
Exactly.
500 people what to do, whatever the number is. Instead, they're like, who do I really influence?
Yeah.
And how does that then impact the rest of the organization? So they have to pick where their influence is going to be. Even though they're accountable for the organization, they really only influence a handful of individuals in the company. So they're faced with the same challenge, right? It's not like they just make up their mind one random Thursday and everybody does stuff.
Yeah.
They've got to figure out how to
One
influence.
email, the whole company's got to shift. Yeah, not
Yeah.
quite. I love that, Jamie. It's a great reminder for everyone that mastering that skill of influencing one person at a time and just believing in the bigger vision, even when it's a long way off, is no different if you're a senior engineer than when you're the senior director or senior vice president.
Exactly.
You're still going to be doing that same thing. You're just influencing people who might have higher leverage to then go influence others to influence others, but your basic job doesn't change. So start now. Start.
Yeah, and you might have different tools in your tool belt. I mean, you might have performance appraisals and setting some goals, and there's tools you have available, degrees of freedom you have available than an individual contributor won't. Again, those are just tools, right? And none are as important as the power of conversation to have that impact.
Amazing. Jamie, if someone wants to get connected to your work, understand how to take curiosity about problem solving, maybe that fire's been lit today, and actually go put this into practice and start getting some information, where's the best place? How can people connect with you, get the book, and learn more?
Yeah, so jflinch.com is the easiest place. They can find links to buy the book, audio, Kindle, whatever, paperback, hardback. They can find my blog, my YouTube channel, all of that stuff. So jflinch.com is the best place to find me.
Awesome. Flinch is Flinch, so jflinch.com. Of course, we'll put that link in the show notes, the direct link to the book on Amazon in the show notes, and all the ways to follow Jamie and his work. I definitely encourage everybody to go do that. And if you want a copy of People Solve Problems, if you know this is an area you want to focus, then shoot me an email. The first 3 people who do listening to this, so Happy Engineer talking to you, if you want a copy of People Solve Problems, email Zach@oasisofcourage.com. Put that in the subject line and include, of course, your mailing address in the email so I know where to send it. The first 3 people who do that, I'll get you a copy for free of Jamie's book as a thank you for sticking with us in this awesome conversation. Jamie, let's wrap it up. I got 100 more questions, but we'll have to do it in a round 2 sometime. And
Sounds good.
you know as well as anybody, as a trainer, as a coach, as a mentor, questions lead, answers follow. So if we want to get better answers in our work, in our lives, in our careers, we need to ask better questions, get that curiosity going. So what would be the question that you would lead the happy engineer with today?
So I think it's particularly relevant for engineers. So I'll choose this one. And it's, what happens if I'm wrong? There's 2 reasons for that question. One, to be more curious about risk. What's the downside, right? What if I am wrong? And how do I go fix that, figure that out, whatever that might be? On the other side, there's a lot of cases we overestimate risk. And so let's be confident and move forward. As a simple analogy or example, like I would look at I go to a restaurant, I go out for dinner, I look at a menu and I'm like, this is the only time I'm at this restaurant. I have to make the right choice. Right. And like a year from now, I won't remember what choice I made. So
That's right.
What happens if I'm wrong? Nothing. I still had a good meal, right? Nothing happens if I'm wrong. So sometimes a lot happens if I'm wrong. Sometimes nothing happens if I'm wrong. And so both sides of that equation, I think it's a useful question to sort of check yourself before you take the next step.
Love it. What happens if I'm wrong? Well, it was not wrong to bring you on the show, Jamie. This was a fantastic conversation. I'm again, truly feeling this for myself. It's like deep curiosity to go after how do I approach solving problems in every area of my life, business just being one part of that. So thank you so much for what you're doing, your work, and appreciate your time being here today, man.
Thanks for having me. I loved it.